Hello, Roz. Good to see you.
Hi, Emma.
Thank you for joining me. So, I like to start these interviews then by letting you introduce yourself a little bit and for us to get to know you. So, can you tell us a bit about what's your journey into Quakers been? How long ago was that? And what were you seeking and what did you find?
And yeah, so I knew nothing of Quakers growing up at all. I was a bit clueless. The only thing I knew was the Quakers porridge oats. And it's interesting because when I talk to a lot of people, they go, "Yeah, that's that Quakers. There's the funny people with the hats, aren't they?" And I suppose I had a bit of that vibe about it because that's all I knew. And then I happened to sort of um, end up in a relationship with a Quaker who was a Quaker from birth and had always been a Quaker. But I didn't even being married to I mean, we didn't have a Quaker wedding. We didn't. My father was a Methodist minister, so my father blessed our wedding, and we certainly didn't have a Quaker wedding. So in the very early days of my relationship with my husband, I was aware that he used to go to a sort of meeting on a Sunday sometimes, but didn't really know what that was about, and he didn't really volunteer information about it. So that sort of went on a bit for a while. Him just going to this meeting, me not really getting the grasp of what it was all about. We were busy doing up a house and making a home together. And then when I had my first child, um, I started to sort of think more about these things. I had a bit of a I think having my first child was a really important moment for me because everything came into focus in that moment, and I started to touch a little bit life, death, and everything, and it just seemed to crystallize all that for me. So I started to seek out things at that point. I then had it was a very massive tragedy that happened in our family where two children were lost in a very terrible car accident. So that sort of compounded everything. Very emotional time. So then I was seeking again. And I mean, my father was a Methodist minister. So I kind of thought, well, that's my tradition, that's my background. So maybe I should go back to that. I had been to meeting with Mark a few times, but I didn't really get it or understand it. I thought maybe I should go back to my roots. So I did try attending a Methodist church, but I didn't really feel it was for me. So I sort of just kept, I mean, I think we both talked a little bit about raising the kids and, meeting being good for them and being raised in some sort of spiritual environment. So I think we started to sort of take the kids along to children's meeting and that sort of, and we made that quite a regular thing when we lived back in Rugby. So that's where it sort of started.
Yeah. So what were you looking for then? I mean, you say that having your first child really kind of started this a more serious look at some kind of faith tradition. Can you say
Yeah.
a bit more about that? What was that like?
Well, I think growing up, I was the youngest of four. My father was a Methodist minister, as I said. I was a churchgoer every day, and I very much rejected that. At that, coming out of that, I really just didn't. I went through a period of just not wanting to be involved. I think, you know, Methodism in Ireland is quite, you fall into the sort of Protestant side of things. It's quite a well-established church, and being the minister's children, we were paraded in every Sunday. Sat, the first row was kept for us. I hated that. I hated all eyes being on me. I hated being the centre of attention. I hated being the minister's daughter. Yeah, I'm using a lot of hate here, but I really did
Hmm.
just want to push away from all of that. So I went through a bit of a barren period, but it did. I mean, obviously, if you grew up in a faith community, you're socialized into that. So I did always believe in a God, I think. So I knew I needed to get back to something of that.
Hmm.
But I tried. I thought, well, maybe Methodism has moved on. Maybe it's different in England. So I did try to go back to that, but it just wasn't, yeah, it didn't do it for me. And then I suppose having my son, I can't really put into words what that was about. It was just giving birth, and I felt it was a really spiritual moment. And yeah, just maybe think about everything more deeply.
Gosh.
Mm,
So there's a couple of things I want to ask about that, I suppose, because the spiritual formation of us as individuals, I think so many of us have stories of where we're kind of rejecting something that we grew up with. And
yeah,
yet, even though we're rejecting part of it, there's a part of it that has formed us and shaped us.
yeah,
And in a way, I really feel empathy or feel sorry for people who have grown up with no religious tradition at all. I think there's something that they just miss out on in human experience, perhaps, really. So I'm
yeah,
interested in how, in our ongoing search, we're still shaped by something, even if we reject it. It's fascinating.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, part of that was, you know, I mean, I've always had a bit of a thing with death because I can remember having these sort of visions of heaven and hell growing up.
Mm,
So, and Methodists are not really, it's not like Presbyterian. I think the Presbyterian church is much more, can be very hellfire and brimstone and all of that stuff. And Methodists aren't like that really. But, I can remember at a very young age speaking to I'm sure I was sitting on the end of the bed in my bedroom talking to my mum and talking about, going to Sunday school every week. You'd get taught the Bible stories and all of those things. And then, you know, heaven, concepts of heaven being very clear as a young child. And then the sort of hell thing and being told that, if you weren't saved, then, anybody that wasn't saved was going to hell,
mm.
basically. That was quite frightening to grow up with that. And maybe part of me just thought, that's just too much for me. I just don't want to. As soon as I saw that other people weren't worrying about that, I thought, right, well, I'm rejecting it.
Okay. So,
I'm not going.
so were you saved?
No, and my three sisters, I've got two sisters and a brother. My brother is, has been a Presbyterian minister. My two sisters are both Christian church going people still. Um, so I was the one that just didn't. And I can remember my father saying, the rest of them have gone through membership for the Methodist Church. This was when I was about, I don't know, I must have been 16 or 17 or something. He said, do you want to go through membership? And I said, no, absolutely not. And I knew that was going to, upset them a bit because I knew they wanted that for me. But I just said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not, I don't buy into that. So therefore, I can't. It wouldn't be true. And my dad sort of respected it. He was, well, yeah, okay, if you're not ready, if you don't feel it's right for you, then that's fine. So the rest of them all went through that sort of confirmation process into the Methodist Church, and I didn't. There's also a lot going on in terms of like evangelical stuff as well. Um, my father had got quite involved with this evangelical movement, Billy Graham and all those American evangelists in America back, and that was sort of filtering through in the 80s. And my parents got quite involved with that sort of a church in Bangor where we lived, and they were very close to the sort of pastors in that place. And they rented out this like roller disco where they used to have these big meetings. And my father had bought into that, and my mother, and there was a big split in the church because in the Bangor Methodist Church there was a lot of people that were frowning on that and saying you shouldn't be. We were trying to they were trying to bring in livelier music, aspects of that type of worship into the Methodist Church to make it more interesting and to try and get more young people in, I think. Um, but there was all of this, talking in tongues and, going up for healing and all of this sort of stuff. And I just remember that really freaked me out. I just thought, I can't, that's not for me. It frightened me in a way. I didn't like it, just
Yeah.
turned me off. and there was a lot of excitability with it, and it just wasn't my scene. So I just kind of became a bit of an outlier, I think, in the family, because that's where my sisters met their partners and married, you know. So there was a lot of that in my home, but I took a different path. It's interesting.
Yeah. So between 16 when you said no to that, and it sounds really a place of conviction in the way you were very clear that that wasn't for you.
Yeah,
And then between then and the birth of your first child, when you started to
yeah.
seek something out, what was that intervening period like? In
So
some-
I got away. I got away. I say I got away. I didn't. I don't mean to sound like that, but I needed to get. I needed to. So I needed to get away from that environment in Northern Ireland. I just needed. I just knew I had to go away. So I started my I came over to England, started my nurse training, met a whole different sort of set of people, and none of them. I just felt like in Northern Ireland, you lots of people were churchgoers. You know, that was you sort of you were Catholic, you were Protestant. It was much more church going type of society. England was much more secular, I
Mm,
suppose.
mm.
So the people mixing with nobody really was bothered about church, nobody. And I just got into that kind of, well, I'm not, you know, and I just stopped worrying about it and thinking about it. Although I suppose I did my nurse training. I was exposed to a lot of death
Mm.
in my job and always have been, all the way through my career. So death's never far from my mind. I mean, I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't think about death. I am a constant death thinker.
Really?
Yeah, plays a big part in my head space, you know? So even though that was going on in the background, though, I sort of tried to just push it out, I think. And I was a bit of a hedonist, just enjoying myself, living in the moment.
Yeah, and when you're
Mm.
young in your 20s, it's quite easy to do that, isn't it? Our bodies
Yeah,
work and life has got
yeah,
stretching out ahead of us. Um,
yeah,
Possibilities are endless. So you then described giving birth as a spiritual experience, and
yeah,
the words that came into my mind was kind of an inbreaking of love, and suddenly this enormity of love. I mean, that's how I don't know if that's how you would describe it, but why was that a spiritual experience?
yeah. Just the start of life. And yeah, I mean, exactly as you said it, better than I could express it. Really, it is this love, unbelievable love that you feel for this child. And it's a different sort of love to any other love I've ever experienced. And the commitment and the fragility of it all and worrying that I could do it right and that I could, the responsibility and yeah, all of these overwhelming emotions. And I just felt gosh, how could this person come into being? There must be something bigger than me, and and then all of us. I think there's just this must be this higher God that's creating all of this and helped me to create this person. I suppose it was just that
Yeah, yeah.
overwhelming emotions. Yeah,
And we don't really hear much about this, do we? We hear about, childbirth being painful or whatever. Um, we don't hear a lot about that kind of early motherhood and that overpowering love. We don't hear about that very much. And maybe it's because women's stories are not seen as that interesting or something. But what you've just talked about is it's just so lovely. It does bring you close to tears, doesn't it? Just hearing it, remembering it, I'm sure is it's an amazing thing.
yeah, that was wonderful. And then I went on and had two more, and I was so grateful. I think I had so many worries and burdens before the baby came that I was so grateful. I thought blessed, I felt so blessed. I felt God has blessed me with this. I felt there was just another worldliness about it. There was just this dimension to it that I felt somebody else had helped me to achieve this. It wasn't just me, and Mark, obviously. it was, this divine intervention that I'd been able to do this. And I was going to, I needed some sort of help on the journey of
Yeah,
parenting.
yeah.
And I wanted my child to grow up in a spiritual environment, I think, from that point as well.
So tell me about that then. Why is it you wanted that for your children?
It's really interesting because actually we raised them in Quakers, but we've never pushed them to, and we've always because I didn't want that kind of, I felt I'd been sort of pushed in a direction with growing up in that. And I love my parents, and they did, they were great. They're fabulous parents, but I just felt I didn't want my children to feel that. Um, I think I felt the disappointment of my parents
Mm,
a lot growing up because I sort of did a bit of rejecting of what was very important to them. And I didn't want my kids to feel that way. I didn't want them to feel, I just wanted them to be open
mm,
to what was around. And I suppose you know, through going on their own journey, then it'll be extra important to them, won't it, if they come to it. I mean, they don't, none of them really go. Well, my stepson goes in London, but my other three don't go to meeting currently. But it's there. It's probably there, a little flame of something.
yeah.
And I think it is important to introduce that early, maybe, just to
And what,
keep their minds open to everything.
yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I wonder if you can say any more about it. 'Cause I remember talking to a young couple who brought their children to meeting, thinking that they said the same thing, that they felt that I think it was the man said, I was brought up without any religious community at all. And I think therefore
Yeah.
I wasn't given that choice. That option wasn't open to me. So we want to give our
Yeah.
children an experience of it because until you've experienced it, you haven't got a free choice.
No, and that's it. It's not indoctrinating them because you definitely don't want to indoctrinate them. I want them to come to their own spiritual awakening in their own time and their own constructs of what that is in their lives. But I think, it is good for them to have, maybe, I suppose maybe we should have taken them around a few churches. I don't know, because, maybe we are just leading them down one
Mm.
religious, if you don't do that. But I suppose who's got time to do all of that when you're raising small
Yeah,
children?
yeah. So
But
how
I feel that, sorry,
so how was that? And as you say, you're raising small children and you're busy and you've got, you're taking them to Quakers sometimes. How was that for you and for them and over that kind of probably 20-year period?
great. They've got some really happy memories of, so started going in rugby, but they were little babies then, really, and toddlers. And then when we moved down here, they were sort of 7, 5, and 3. So they went to Quaker meeting here fairly regularly, all the way through, and they took on roles. I think Adam went to junior yearly meeting, and he was involved with that one year. They got involved in certain things within Quakers. It's just hard because there's not many kids, so you don't have that critical mass of children, and
Mm,
that's what I suppose growing up in the Methodist Church, we had big Sunday schools.
yeah.
Loads of activities. We had GB and girls brigade, boys brigade, and all of these brownies and guides and all these things going on. And I felt a bit sort of sad because sometimes I take them out of meeting and it's just them. You sort of think it's a bit of a shame, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
nice that they've got other kids. And some of the collective stuff that we've done across area has been good.
Mm,
They've made contacts that way, but there's not enough of it for them to have meaningful
mm.
contact, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a shame. Yeah.
So how was your own spirituality kind of shaped over that period to where you are today?
So yeah, I would still say I've got one foot in and one foot out of Quakers, really, still, because I just don't know whether. I mean, Um, it's a real love, not hate, but it's just a real, you know, I find it really difficult because there's bits, the bits of it, some of it is just amazing. The fact that, you can turn up and there's no, there's no creed or color or, religion. Everybody's welcome in meetings. So I find that really amazing that it's so egalitarian, that I love that there's no um, leadership structure, but I also hate that there's no leadership structure. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because nothing gets done, and
Yeah.
it can be really draining, as well. But then that's the bit that draws you into it, isn't it? Because you don't want hierarchies, you don't want all this nonsense. That's what George Fox railed against. It's the light within.
Yeah.
It's focusing on the true godliness, stripping away all of the churchiness. But let's face it, you do need a bit of organisation. Somebody's got to do it, otherwise things can't happen.
So
Um,
what is your own experience at the moment then, week in, week out, of true godliness and the light within and this inbreaking love that you experienced during childbirth? And I mean, lots of us say that we've had these amazing experiences and then it never quite comes back in the same way. Um,
well,
but what's your ongoing weekly experience of that now?
I don't know. I think I really struggle with discernment. I find it a real burden discerning what I should bring into meeting and what I should say and what I shouldn't say. That's a real issue for me because I'm quite gobby person and confident person. So I've had to train myself over the years not to be the one that speaks all the time in in meetings at work and everything. I think, no, keep a lid on it, keep a lid on it, keep a lid on it. And then, so that is sort of going on in the background. And then I'm going into meetings thinking, well, this is obviously a different thing. This is like feeling spiritually, feeling the channeling God.
Hmm.
So I need to be really, really sure that I'm channeling God. And sometimes I just don't know that I don't say stuff because I'm not sure whether, like they talked about the Quakers quaking, quaking,
Hmm.
you're supposed to really feel that. So I feel the burden of that sometimes. I I'm doing a lot of thinking, but for me to discern what is my thinking and
Yeah.
what is God is really hard for me.
And I don't think you're
Mm,
alone in that. And one of the things that I've been talking about in lots of these conversations is how do we help people with that centering down process, on a weekly basis. And we've been talking about, for example, starting earlier, so that the first half an hour is helping people move into that space. Because
yeah,
it really worries me that people find aspects of Quakers draining because things that are draining, well, they're just going to peter out in the end, things that are draining, you're not compelled to keep coming back. Whereas this living fountain that just keeps on, this inbreaking of love that just keeps on going is so
yeah,
enriching and enlivening and energizing that
yeah,
it can go on forever.
yeah,
So if we can help people feel that, get down into that, and remember
yeah.
what that feeling is.
But it's hard though, isn't it, Emma? You go into a room full of people, you have to have, you have to quite a lot of confidence to speak.
Hmm.
But then again, you shouldn't do if God's compelling you to speak. So it shouldn't matter. Everybody's equal in that room. But I'm sure there's quite a few people who go to meeting who just put a lid on it quite a lot because they're just not, and is building the human relationships, is that part of gaining the confidence to be able to speak?
Hmm.
I don't know. Some people might feel better about just speaking in front of who they consider to be strangers. Others might feel more comfortable if they know people better because the community, it probably needs building, doesn't it, more so that everybody feels a bit more comfortable to get up and say what they need to say. Well, there's layers and layers to this, though, isn't there? There's layers and
Yeah.
layers to it.
Well, there's two things that come to mind in what you're saying there. One is that we feel compelled to speak and
Yeah,
we can't not speak, we so that it's so alive in us. It's so powerful that we just have to get it out. I mean, one of the things I said when I ministered a few weeks ago, I said to somebody afterwards, it's a bit like I'm floating down a stream and then I get caught in this eddy around in this little corner here. And these words keep going around my mind. And I know that I'm just getting caught in this eddy and I'm going faster and faster. And the words, it's not like I'm going faster, it's almost like I'm slowing down, but I can't get out of that eddy of those words going round. And I know the only way I can get out of that eddy is by standing, speaking, and then I can sit down and go, "Oh, right, okay, I'm out
yeah,
of that, and there's nothing I can do until it's said. I can't move on. I can't just, I'm trying to just go back and drift down that stream again, and it's just not happening. So it's compelling. I mean, you can't avoid it.
yeah, yeah. But you've got to get from that point to standing to delivering it,
Mm,
and you feel everybody's waiting. There's a performative element to giving ministry. So I can have that all going on. I quite often have a lot of that sort of stuff going on inside, but I just can't get myself up and to say it. I mean, I think it would be really useful to sort of think more about this in terms of the detail around, you know, because I'm sure there's lots of people that will,
mm.
have thoughts and,
And
want to do.
you used the phrase putting a lid on it, and I wonder whether it is possible, even if you have this urge to say something, it's still possible to use your willpower to put a lid on it and suppress it, isn't it?
Mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, on the occasions, there's been a couple of occasions where I have been sort of shaken a bit when I sat down, my heart's racing, you know. So is that the sort of quaking of the early Quakers? Is that the physiological signs of being so compelled to say what you need to say?
Mm.
But then I suppose, there's other times when I haven't felt quite like that. I sort of feel like I have to feel like that before I can get up.
Yeah, yeah. And the
So,
second thing that I was going to say, based on what you just said, was that, a bit like you described that giving birth, and suddenly you have this sense of responsibility and awe of
yeah,
the fragility of life and what's my place in it and I need help. So I sometimes get that feeling in meeting.
right. Similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean I wouldn't be so grand as to say it's like childbirth, but I can see there's echoes of it because I get this sense of responsibility and that I can't put a lid on it because that would feel irresponsible, you know? And that I suppose it's a kind of a love for the people in the room and a recognizing that there's some fragility there and that maybe what I've got to say, what I've been given, is helpful in some ways. And I don't know, but to put a lid on it is irresponsible or disrespectful, and I wouldn't want to be that disrespectful to something that's firing me up, if you see what
Yeah. 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 It's very interesting, isn't
I
it?
mean.
Because we
Mm,
don't teach anybody how to do this. They just walk in, they hear a bit about Quakers, they walk in, but there's a lot going on in meeting. A lot, isn't there, in
yeah,
that hour?
yeah.
Um, and people from other faiths, it's alien to them. Like, if you're growing up in that, then you get it much more.
Mm,
But if you're not, then it's quite an alien sort of concept to you. When you've grown up with hymns and a structure, and the minister doing everything, and you're passive, and
That's right.
Yeah,
So when you say there's a lot going on, which I think is a great way of describing it, as you say, there's layers, isn't there? Do you think we could do more on a weekly basis? And I'm talking about every Sunday morning across the country, all meetings. Do you think there's some culture cultural differences that we should be introducing, or some structured elements, or some teaching, or whatever? Like, have you ever thought about these kinds of things? I think I only
yeah,
wish they might do this, or we, actually, rather than they, we might do this.
definitely. Yeah, I think we could do more to make the whole thing a bit more. I mean, I suppose the internet plays a big part in it now, and this is what you're doing here is amazing because it is accessible. People just use the internet. The next generation coming up, they're all internet users, aren't they?
Mm.
We need to get more out on, get the message out there to people to help them understand it. Um, but with meeting, yeah, perhaps we could do something. We could do a different sort of thing. Maybe we could keep the traditional meeting because that's always been the way it's been, isn't it? But have something else as an additional, to help people. Because I know it's all very silent, but unless people are talking to each other, they're not really bonding and we're not making a community, are we? We're not. We're just sitting in silence. And then you've got that little bit at the end where we all have tea. But, people drift away quite quickly. They don't necessarily feel comfortable with that either. So where are they supposed to go
Yeah,
to learn more about this?
yeah. Because one of the ideas I've been talking about with people is, you know, starting the morning at 10 o'clock rather than later. So it's just a short time earlier than we would normally be arriving. But that, one of the elders, or we just take it in turns. And if you just bring something along, and it's something like, it could be a poem, it could be a reading, it could be to sing a song together, or just to talk about a picture that you saw that really moved you, anything, literally anything. Um, and that we just do that in a small group in a very worshipful way. And we just commit to that, I suppose, because it's about intention, isn't it?
Yeah,
Bringing the intention that this is going to help us settle into meeting for worship, and that when everyone else arrives, we're already in that zone, if you like, we're already centered. And
yeah,
we make that commitment to share and to listen and to really enter into that space and to treat it as honorably and with such depth as you've just described that childbirth, that's what we're talking about. Precious experiences that we hold and deeply enter together. And that's how we build community, isn't it? That's how we build a
yeah,
meeting of worship where we're all trusting each other and trusting that space.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, but why would you have it before and not after? Because you think there's some sort of purity about going into meeting and just going in and seeing what happens with people. Because I don't know, would you be leading the meeting a bit if you did it before? Because you'd already have people there who'd already sort of been there and been in that space, and then I don't know, it's just a question to ask.
I suppose I was thinking, obviously, you could do things afterwards in terms of sharing how that has been for you and what came up for you. But it seemed to me that if you did something beforehand and you took it in turns, so it's not like one person's leading it, but it means that you're already, by the time you're hitting that start of the meeting for worship, you're already in a very deep place. And anybody new joining
Mm,
would already be
yeah,
in a very settled and centered place. Um, and that is in itself a pure experience that you just use that word. Because as soon as you walk in, somebody has to start that silence, don't they? Somebody has to start that. So I think
yeah,
if a few people have gathered early and made that commitment to it, I mean, you talked about having one foot in and one foot out. I'd
yeah.
like to, I'd
You're
like to
right.
know a bit more about that, really. Which foot is in and which foot is out, and why, What does that mean?
Yeah, I think there's probably stuff that, I don't want to be. I mean, I think the Quakers are amazing. That's why I've been going for 20 years. And even when I did take a sort of a year, I thought, no, I'm not going anymore. I'm a bit like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to take a break. But I came back, didn't I? So there's obviously a pull there. And I don't think there's any other faith community that will. There's something about Quakers that's very special. I mean, there's all the Eastern religions as well, isn't there? Buddhism. I always think Quakers is a bit like the sort of the Buddhists of the Christian world, aren't they, in a way, in their philosophy of life and all that.
Mm.
But I'm not a Buddhist. I haven't been brought up. I believe in God, and I believe in my particular Christian faith background, God.
Yeah.
So that's where I choose to be, and Quakers does give me that spiritual nourishment on a weekly basis, I suppose. But there's lots of things that wind me up about it. The endless meetings and the meetings that go on and on and on, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So what would it
But
take to get you to have 2 feet in?
more community. I do think more community.
So what does that mean to you? What would that feel like?
Being able to contribute in a way that, you know, I'd like to be able to contribute more. I'm at a stage now where I probably could contribute more. I mean, I've got a lot. I'm going to have more time on my hands, and I want to contribute. I mean, I sometimes think if we got everybody in the door, if we were packed to the rafters, what would we do? I think while you're a sort of dwindling organization, you can just keep ticking along, can't you? With everybody just getting older and coming along, and but if you had
Five
lots of
people.
people, sorry, carry on.
There's 25 people on average, maybe 22, maybe 28. That's quite a reasonable number of people, isn't it? Is that not?
Yeah, but no, no, it's just that my experience of meeting is people just drift in and drift away again. There's a
Mm,
die-hard core people that go and go and go, and lots of people are transient with Quakers. And what is it we're not doing to keep them? Why don't they want to? Why do they drift? Why do they go?
yeah,
Maybe it is part of their spiritual journey, and we don't want to. We're not evangelists, are we? Quakers are not. That's not their thing. That's not what they do.
no,
They role model. Quakers role model their behaviours and their lives, speak. So it's not that sort of organisation. Like we're not going to go out and drag people off the street, but people come into meeting and do. I've noticed over the years, they just some of them just come for a period of months and then you don't see them again. And I think that's a shame because I feel like maybe we're not doing something that we're
so
not maybe giving them something they
yeah,
need.
and that's why I suppose I'm trying to explore that, and I suppose I can't ask them, but I can ask you. So yeah, that's why I'm posing the question really. What is it that we could do that would encourage you to be more committed, encourage you to take part more, encourage you to feel more 2 feet in, So I just that's why I'm asking you because you're the person sat in front of me.
So I think, yeah, more things like Quaker Quest is really good. I know that's not around anymore, is it? But those sort of things are really good. More stuff outside of the meeting, I suppose.
Mm. Getting to know each other.
Yeah.
Do you feel like people know you in your local?
Well, that's probably it's like I'm not saying it's anybody else's fault. I take responsibility for this. Sometimes I just go along to a meeting and I'm out the door quite quickly at the end. So I take responsibility for that. I've never volunteered for a role as an elder, or I'm not even a member, I'm an attender.
Hmm.
So I'm not fully signed up. But it's a sort of chicken and an egg, isn't it? It's a chicken and
Yeah.
an egg. There's something that's stopping that. And
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I do wonder whether we need to encourage people that the more you put in, the more you'll get out of it.
yeah,
And sometimes, we live in a society where there's not that much commitment. Um, and that to try to encourage people to do more and volunteer for this, and would you come and do this, and actually you'll get more out of it the more you put
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, I think that's right, definitely. I need, to take responsibility as well and get
Mm.
more involved, really. It's been 20 years. Why am I still sitting on the sidelines? I should
Yeah,
be jumping in a bit more. But sometimes I don't know about what's going on either, and I don't think I'm networked in really either. I was on the network, I was on the email, but I just was a bit overwhelmed by all the emails, and the emails were they were just endless. There were a lot of emails. So
yeah,
I think that I then just thought I can't deal with all those emails. And there is a lot going on with Quakers, isn't there? There's lots of different pockets of activities happening all the time. So sometimes there's quite a confusing array of wonderful stuff that's going on, but
yeah.
it's what do you get involved with, you know?
So what aspects of Quakers in terms of the witness and the actions and the out in society and out in the world, what aspects interest you? What might you be enticed into doing or called into doing more of?
Um, well, I think there's a lot of people on the peace doing the peace thing. That's always been really big in Quakers, isn't it? Out of all the testimonies, there's a lot of people. I mean, I suppose like justice, I suppose, like working with, you know, I think younger people lack a real spiritual homeland, don't they?
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids out there. I mean, we live in a very secular society. People just don't go to church. So I feel like there's a whole group of young people growing up. None of my kids' friends don't. None of them went to church. So there
Mm.
must be because people seek, don't they? There is a seeking for spirituality. So I think engaging with that, with those people to help them with mental health issues, with all this bombardment of stuff that they get through social media and the horrible things that are going on in the world, I feel their burden because I see that they carry the burden of all of that. It's horrible, you know.
Because I just wonder, I suppose it's just occurred to me that what I'm thinking about reminds me of the story you just said about your father saying to you 16. So are you ready for membership? Isn't that interesting? It just had a memory as soon as I started formulating what I was about to ask you. And I thought of what your father said to you. You weren't ready at 16, but a few years on, because there is something about commitment, and you've devoted your time to raising your family and nursing, I mean that they're very worthwhile things to have spent your life doing. But is it a new phase for you in your life, and might that be more commitment, and what might it be? And I just wondered, do you spend time praying or asking for help or asking for guidance or talking about this, about what is your calling for the next 20 years?
Yeah, I've always done that whole 5-year plan
Yeah.
thing. So, I've always been a 5-year plan, and I'm sort of coming up to retirement now, thinking, well, what's the next 5-year plan? And I have got, I'm not a commit. I wouldn't say I'm a commitment phobe. I just feel like if I do commit, I'm all in. So if that sort of scares me then, because I think if I'm saying I'm going to do it, it will be 100%. So I've got to be careful about what I commit to. But then, committing to being a Quaker, if I was to become a member, I mean, neither of us are members. Mark's not a member either. So maybe I should look into that sort of side of it. That would be a first step. And then I suppose naturally that takes you on to other roles and things.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of, supporting people and what you might call spiritual accompaniment of some kind of we don't do 5-year plans with people, do we? And say, well, what is your calling for the next 5 years? And is there something we can do to help you be more committed? And, because we know that that's not draining, that if you get the right thing that's right for you, that's energizing and it gives you a whole
Yeah,
lease of life,
yeah,
for
Yeah.
that's ready for your life stage. And it could be that we could say, right, well, you're people who are going through different life stages, that we say, well, what do you think's right for you now? How can we help you? How can we support you? And maybe it's a project that you want to lead. Okay, well, how do we help you do that? Or maybe you want to get involved in something that's already happening. We don't do much of that
Mm.
really.
No, because if you're just going in and out of a meeting again, I mean, there's the stuff at the end, isn't it? There's the what do you call it? At the end of the meeting, they do the
Like
message
afterwards and
and
noticing.
then notices. Yeah, the notices. So you do learn a bit about what's going on through the notices. And I've gone to business meetings a few times. So I do tune
Mm.
in to. I try my best to tune in to what's going on in local meeting. Um, but where do you generate the ideas?
Yeah, yeah. But you see, that could
That's
just be
the
a
thing.
conversation, couldn't it? There could be a few of us get together and we could say, well, let's help you think about that. Let's spend an hour and we think
Definitely.
about your journey and what's going to, you know, really speak to you. And you're just going to be so excited about doing this piece of work and getting this project going or whatever. Um, the phrase knowing each other in the things which are eternal. You've got to take time to get to know each other in that way.
Yeah.
And I and
But
I
it's so beneficial. It's so beneficial, isn't it? Because I can bounce off you, and if I'm just trying to figure that out on my own, that's
yeah,
quite hard. I don't. And then you move in different circles to me. You've got contacts with people, and this is how that things are born, how things
yeah,
are invigorated. So we do need to have that in meeting.
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, we're just trudging along on a Sunday, having
Exactly.
some wonderful words,
Exactly.
taking away, feeling spiritually nourished for a little while afterwards. But what are we doing with that? What are we taking forward? How are we helping society? How are we making change and,
Yeah.
getting our voices heard out there? We're not really, are we? So,
And I think that, the theme of our conversation has been you've got to really put some effort in. I mean, childbirth was our starting, image and experience. And there's a fair bit of effort and pain and gonna go into that, isn't it? So it's
absolutely.
worth it. That's the
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, I love what you're doing here, and I think it's fantastic, and these are things I think we can do more in Swansea meeting. We can do
mm,
more, you
mm,
know. And you've got to try things, haven't you?
yeah, yeah,
Your idea about the hour, like, or the 45 minutes before meeting actually starts, we just trial it.
yeah, yeah,
And people just, see how it goes, and then we can talk about whether that's working or does it need adjusting.
yeah, yeah.
How is it serving everyone and how does it feel? And I think we've just got to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But somebody's got to do it, haven't they? And
Well,
I'm
that's
glad you're
right.
doing it because I'm not sure, even after going for 20 years, whether I'd be the person and I don't know why that is. I don't know why that is. That's the thing, because it's probably because I've only got one foot in and one foot out, and I don't feel I'm fully in enough to be the person to drive that. See?
And I just think it's trying things on Sunday morning, and it's also having some kind of one-to-one or small groups and thinking about, well, how can we help you work out what your calling is for the next 5 years? I
Yeah,
do think that's something that's a great idea. Um,
yeah,
so what are your hopes or fears then for the future of Quakers? Because this is where these ideas of this video came from, you see, this idea of the future of Quakers across Britain. So.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I've got a book called, I've been driven back because when we said we were going to do this, I thought, oh gosh, I'm not very, you know, I'm a bit of a sort of I go in and just open myself on a Sunday and go home again. Like I've said, I've been very clear. And I would like to be more committed to all of that. But I did pick up a book. I've got a really good book called A Portrait in Grey, which talks about the history of Quakers, and it's such a fascinating book. Because my father would say, "Oh, the Quakers are sort of humanist, aren't they? Really, they're not really. They're not his idea of religion is so steeped in theology and in the Bible, but actually you read that book, A Portrait in Grey, and you realise there's huge theology behind. Quakerism, and it's been going all this time, and it came out of this time of turmoil and the levelers and the Reformation, and it's been going for all these hundreds of years. I think it'll be going for hundreds of years to come
Yeah.
because we have adapted and changed over hundreds of years, and we will continue to. And out of all the church, all the doctrines and all the churches out there, Quakers is so flexible, welcoming, so open to everybody. That out of all of the belief systems, I think it's the one that will stay the course. It will just adapt and change.
And we're not humanist. I mean, I wouldn't say we're humanist, would you?
No, but it's interesting that my father should say
Mm.
that. I think he thinks. I mean, there are humanists, aren't there, that come to. There are people who, that's how welcoming and open we are. We're open to everybody's ideas. We don't reject anybody's thoughts. Um, I think again, if we can get some good discussion going, because people want a place to go. I've run deaf cafes and stuff in the past, um, because I think in our modern society we've lost the sort of church, and that's where people used to go with their grief, with their mourning, for these important events in life. Like I was talking about, I went when I would give birth. People go back again when you die, and but we haven't got. There's a lot of this has disappeared, and people have become, they've wanted to sanitize death and medicalize death and all of those things, and there's nowhere to go to take your grief, to take you go to counselling, but people have a need to sort of talk about these things, don't they?
Mm. Mm.
And a faith group is a wonderful place to support all of that and help people through those things. So there'll always be a place for it, I think.
Yeah. You said at the very beginning that death has always been a big feature of your thinking. Um,
Yeah,
have you found a way to talk about that and deal with that now? Do you have a positive relationship with how you think about it, or is it still a
yeah. I actually, when I went up to Woodbrook a good number of years ago, we took the kids. I think we went for a weekend. There was a weekend workshop thing going on up there, and I remember the guy that was running the workshop um, said something about life after death, and I actually went to speak to him after the whole session because I was just like, it really triggered me what he'd been saying. It was something to do with that there's no real thoughts in Quakerisms about after,
Hmm.
about heaven or hell or what happens after your life ends, sort of thing. And I had this whole discussion with him, and it was quite revelationary for me because I'd always grown up with that. It's heaven, it's hell, and purgatory. Well, that's something that other people believe in, like the Catholics and whatever. But for us, it's heaven and it's hell. And he was very important in dispelling all of that for me and helping me to believe that, well, the Quaker, but this is what he was saying. Generally, a lot of Quakers believe that you create your heaven on earth. Um, you just get on with your life in the present, and whatever happens after that, you don't have to have massive thoughts about that. That's just
Yeah.
something that you don't need to worry about.
Because it won't matter when you die. You won't worry about it when you die, I suppose, is one way of thinking about it.
Yeah, but that was really like that lifted a big burden for me. So Quakers have done a lot for me in deconstructing my
Mm.
kind of childhood sort of visions of heaven and hell and things. It's helped me to get over that and just become a bit more comfortable, because I suppose I always thought, well, I'm going to go to hell. So death was a real worry for me. It was a real worry. Whereas now I think, well, I don't know. I've tried my best on earth, so we'll see. On
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in creating heaven now.
earth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's really a wonderful way to see it, isn't it?
yeah,
Just try your best on earth,
yeah.
you know? And you might be reincarnated, who knows what goes on. But just all you can do is try your best here.
Mm.
And Quakers, being part of Quakers and this faith community is part of that, isn't it? Letting that spiritual love run through you and then go out into the world in whatever way you can demonstrate that daily, weekly, through setting 5 year goals or whatever. Yeah.
Well, let's do that. That
Yeah.
sounds like a great plan.
I guess you'll be in touch, Emma, won't you?
Yeah. We'll sort all that out. We'll get you a
Sort all
5 year
that
plan.
out. Perfect.
Okay, well, great. Look, thanks so much for talking to me, Roz. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, yeah, it's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.